Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Socratic Satsang. Our guest for today is someone very special, Melissa Monte, the spark that ignited Mind Love, a show with over 7 million downloads and ranked in the top 0.5% of podcasts worldwide. Wow. Melissa has a gift for blending science, mindfulness, and just the right amount of wit to help people expand their horizons and live with more joy. She's had conversations with some of the most fascinating thinkers of our time, but today we get the pleasure of turning the mic towards her. We are excited to get to know the person behind Mind Love. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Awesome. Well, we'll get right into it. So, we're excited to get to know more about you. We just want to open it up to you. Tell us a little bit about you, your history, how you got to where you are.
I feel like my story is a thousand stories in one, but when I look at the overall arch of it, I could see how I was disappearing in pieces until a certain phase. And so one day I found myself sitting in a jail cell wearing torn scrubs and pre worn panties. And I wasn't even concerned about the felony charges that were in front of me. I was concerned about where I was going to purge my jail food. And there was something about that moment, the dichotomy of it, that I just realized how lost I was. I didn't know who I was anymore. But I think that's what happens when you spend years just systematically disconnecting from your own body. And so uh, when I was trying to get my life together, I realized that a lot of this started when I was 15. I was assaulted after blacking out at a party, and I told myself that I was fine. And it was pretty traumatic because well, for obvious reasons, but I also had to deal with the repercussions of everyone talking about it at school because as I was passed out, there was a group of people watching my abuse. And I told myself that I was fine. And I told myself it wasn't going to affect me. And it was even to the point that and this is going to sound terrible, I almost mocked people who did let it affect them, and not harshly, but internally, more like, I don't understand how anybody lets something like this bring them down. Just keep going forward. Clearly, it was a reflection of my internal dialogue, but I became really good at performing strength. And at that time, I can see that now as the moment that I stopped trusting my body. So I became kind of a walking shell with a bright smile. And I think when you disconnect from yourself that early, you just start to collect survival strategies. So I was binge drinking, alcohol, a lot of alcohol, party drugs. I had developed a really intense case of bulimia, and I was just training myself not to feel. I think that's what bulimia really is. It's, yeah, training yourself not to feel the hunger, not to feel the pain, not to feel your own voice. And so I just kept going and stayed likable, stayed small. But years later, I met a guy and he was charming and generous and he said all the right things. And it just felt like somebody finally came to sweep me out of my life and into theirs. But over time, his stories didn't really add up. And I felt it. There were like these tiny inconsistencies that my body noticed while my mind looked away. But I also was making a lot of excuses for his behavior because his dad died the weekend I met him, and my dad had died when I was 19. So I became determined to love him the way I didn't feel loved and understood when I was going through that. But that also meant swallowing every single warning and all of the red flags. And I ended up finding out over the next year and a half that he had a gambling addiction. I then found out he was an alcoholic. I then found out about his meth addiction. I found out he was cheating on me with sex workers. And eh, I got so used to making excuses that I didn't even really know how to act on the truth anymore. And so I ended up going to LA or to Hawaii, I mean, to get away from him for almost 2 months and live with one of my friends who lived there. And I did kind of get a little bit of my health back, but I didn't do any of that inner work. So when I came back home, it was just a few phone calls until I was in the old patterns. And then one day we were pulled over on the way to lunch, and I thought, uh, like we were running a stop sign or something like that. But then the officers made us get out of the car and they opened up the trunk. And I'll just never forget the way he looked at me when he saw over 50 lock boxes, a pair of bolt cutters, and cases of stolen jewelry. And so I had thought he had a jewelry business. He told me this whole story about having a jewelry business with his dad that I was helping him with. I was helping him list things on eBay, but he was actually robbing houses and then selling what he stole on eBay. And it's an even more complicated story. I mean, all the jewelry looked the same, like this big gaudy jewelry. And there's even this crazy story about how he stole most of it from this one house. And so there's just a lot of things where I can see why I was blinded to it. But there was also a lot of things where I can't really see why I was blinded to it. And it really goes to show you how strong that internal narrative can be, or your own blind spots. And so it ended up that I could have gone to trial to prove my innocence, but if I had done that, it would have guaranteed that he had to go to trial too because our cases were combined. And if he did that, he would have pretty much been guaranteed to get 10 years in jail or more. And I was just so used to giving him everything that I gave him my freedom to, and I took a felony plea deal at 22. And so that moment, I just remember wanting to press the reset button so much. It's like everything that I had worked for was wiped clean. Now I was just a felon. Who else was I? And so I really had to, I thought I was finding myself after that. But it took me years and years to realize that I don't think we ever really find ourselves. We create ourselves. And so during the time before I knew better, I was letting all of my unconscious and subconscious programming create my life based on my traumas, based on my inherited beliefs, based on bullying. And then the period of being lost, I was just putting out there that I was lost. I didn't know who I am. And I think for years, I still was trying to become other people in a way, finding what was acceptable to fit in. And when I finally realized that I'm actually creating myself, then I could start with a blank slate and make choices that led to the person that I wanted to be. And so I ended up going into entrepreneurship because it was the only way I could find the kind of success I wanted without explaining all of that on a couple lines of a job application. And it closed all of the other doors. And so it helped me kind of move into that confidently. And there was a lot of steps between that. It was not this overnight thing. I had to make one tiny decision at a time. There were years where I was making some good decisions mixed with a bunch of bad, going to yoga, getting yoga certified while doing a bunch of ecstasy in the evening. But eventually the two versions of myself, I began to let go of the one that I didn't intentionally create and boost up the one I was. And so that's really what I live by now, is just realizing that you can't put your creator powers on hold. And I think there's this big misconception in self-development where we think, oh, well, I read The Secret. I can manifest things into my life. I can create my reality. But then we do it in a concentrated way, like, oh, I'm going to manifest on Mondays. And the rest of the days, I'm just going to wing it. But every thought you have is sending ripples into your reality. And every belief that you choose, and I'm saying choose intentionally because people don't realize you can choose them, is shaping what shows up for you. And so the only choice you really have is to create consciously and intentionally, or by default, by your programming. But it's still a choice. And so that's been my main message in the last few years of my life, is just trying to help people identify and rewrite the unconscious narratives that are creating their lives.
Absolutely. Wow, such a powerful story that you have. Um, I'm curious, this part you're talking about with the subconscious and that writing our story, when you look back even before maybe being 15, or what were some of those subconscious beliefs that you held? How did that come into existence for you?
I thought I actually had a pretty good foundation, considering I am lucky compared to many people. I was an only child of two parents, and I was deeply loved, and they both wanted me. It was fighting over the custody and things like that. My mom had full custody, though. My dad came from a lot of trauma. M- Um, but they both gave me little seeds of things while I was also absorbing the little parts that they didn't realize they had control over. And so I did some of the things I had to work through were feeling like men were the providers, and in a way where I think it was really hard for me to make money eventually on my own. But I also was always lonely as an only child. I didn't really question some of those things. Um, I always saw my dad skirting around the system, and I will say I'm very resourceful from picking up things from him. But some of the good things were like my dad would pay me to read self-development books. He'd pay me $50 to write a little report on it. And so I remember learning mind over matter really early. And I didn't have a deep enough understanding of what that meant. And so it served in many ways, but in some it didn't. For example, the sexual assault. I tried to power over that with my mind, and I just said, "I'm not gonna let this affect me." I'm and I my intentions were good there, but I was unaware of the emotional trauma that would be stored in my body from that, and what would happen if I didn't address that or feel it or release it. I yeah, and so I think with all of us, even set up with a good foundation. I ended up getting a stepdad when I was 5, who is still my stepdad. I was able to see two parents grow in love, and I believe part of that created my beautiful relationship that I have now and what I expect for myself. And so there's a mix of good and bad, but I think even in the best scenarios, we're going to pick up things. The thing that when the 10-year-old called me fat and just before middle school, when I was bullied a couple years after that, when somebody took advantage of my body and I was confused about what that meant, what my worth was after that. I remember becoming really promiscuous for a couple of years, and I see it now as maybe trying to take my power back. I even recognized it a little bit back then of trying to rewrite the memory of my first sexual experience by just piling on a lot more. And so, yeah, we're all absorbing beliefs from our experiences, from our families, from our cultures, from our environments, from teachers. And it's difficult to keep track of all of them. And so I think we just have to trust that when we have the awareness and the intention, the ones we're ready for will reveal themselves.
Wow, that's quite an experience, quite a journey you've been through. There'd be many kids, young kids, who are going through something similar, and they may not have the resources internally to pull themselves out the way you did. So, and maybe they haven't even read books like you have. So, what would be your advice on how to get your inner voice to talk, how to listen to it? What are the red flags one should look out for? To just help a young child sidestep getting into this kind of a whole traumatic ordeal.
I go to two things usually. I still will notice now, like, oh, that's a belief I need to rewire. Or if I'm trying to rewire a behavior, for example, I focus on my inputs and I'm really almost religious about it. For example, I gave up drinking a couple of years ago. And in order to do that, I went to Audible and I got like all books on giving up drinking. I went to my podcast. I started listening to all of the accounts I could, the podcasts I could about giving up drinking, and I just brainwashed myself. I then replaced m- that habit with uh, mocktails, and I started getting really into mocktail recipes, all the alcohol alternatives. I didn't hang out with the people that were going to be tempting at that time. And I did that very slowly in earlier on. And because of the length of time it took with how slow I was doing it, Now I'm just like, okay, I know what to do. These are the things I'm cutting out. These are the things I'm adding in. And this is all I'm doing for a couple of months. And if I feel myself slipping, I'm like, need another book. What is this one? And it's really helpful. I'm so glad we're living in a time where these types of things are so accessible. And even if you don't have money to purchase Audible books, you can download the app Libby, put in your library card number, and sign up for different audiobooks and ebooks, and go to your local library, go to local meetings that are happening. And so if you are starting from scratch, be really aware of what your inputs are. And your inputs aren't just what you're listening to, it's what you're watching. I would turn the channel when I realized there were shows that were glorifying alcohol, for example, and your friendships, the people that you're hanging around with. Doesn't mean you need to cut people out, but it might mean that you should limit time with the people that are going to bring you back where you don't want to be, and expand time with the people that might lead you in a direction you do want to be. And if you don't have those people, because I didn't at that time, I was such a party girl back in my 20s that I had to find my new tribe. And so going to yoga, I ended up making some friends there. I then did yoga teacher training. And so I didn't exactly know what my steps were, but I did have an intention, and I took action on the wisdom that I received from myself. And so the other step is having enough stillness and silence to actually learn to hear your own voice. And this is a complicated process for people who are just getting started. Because if you just sit there and you've always been an anxious wreck or let your thoughts run rampant without checking them, when you sit in silence, that's all you're going to hear. And so, what I'm aware of now is there is a period of heart purification. And all that really is learning to connect your heart and your mind. And that might be a little complicated for people, but an easy way to start is to just focus on your heart space. Ask it questions. If what you hear is fear based, it's still your programming. So just wait and try to sit there in stillness, non judgmental. The moment we start judging, we contract, or we either resist or we cling. So just sit there and allow it to be, let it float away, and see what else is there. The more that you do this, the more you're going to get to know what your own language sounds like. You're going to develop that relationship. I always say it's just like if you started dating somebody new and all of your dates were going to a movie, you'd never know that person. It doesn't matter if you spent every day of the year with him. The same is true with ourselves, and so many of us are doing that. We have a moment of silence and we're scrolling or we're watching. And so just because you're alone with yourself doesn't mean you're getting to know who you are. And so allow this. I invite you to let this process be fun and exciting and a lifelong journey. I'm still understanding myself on deeper levels because you're not doing anything wrong and you're not getting started late, whatever that internal narrative is. Again, just let those negative internal narratives float out the other side. Your brain is just braining. It's doing what it's always done. And through this process, you're going to clear out the old and make room for some new intentional thoughts to bring in. But you have to take action on them, because if you don't take action, you're going to create self-beliefs that you're not the type of person to trust yourself. So get a nudge. Maybe it's going to a meetup of a higher vibrational people or whatever it is. Just do the things and then sit there and notice. What do I feel now? What's the best part of this? What did I gain? This is how you change your inner world.
I think that's such solid advice, definitely. Um, I'm curious, this part that came up early on where you were talking about, um, kind of shutting down some of those emotions and being like, "Hey, I'm not gonna feel any of this." Which I think is a real it's such a it's there to protect us, right? I mean, it's there for a reason. It comes out for a reason. So I'm curious, like, what your relationship is with that part now. If
I still sometimes feel it's my natural instinct to want to just keep going and not touch it. And so I know that I have to create the space for that. So one example is last September, our family went through a series of crises. We were being evacuated from our home due to a fire, and it was ominous. Like you couldn't breathe outside. It was dark orange. All while I was meant to find out the gender of my baby at the time, and I went down to LA to find out and had been told the baby died. And my husband was having a series of cluster headaches, which are known to be the worst pain known to medicine. It shouldn't even be called a headache. It will make his head swell up. Won't be able to see. It's a really horrible, traumatic condition, and it happens every year and a half or so. And so all this was happening at once, and I could just feel myself hardening, like numbing over. And so and actually, I was planning a retreat and having to move the retreat from my town since because of the fires somewhere else in like a couple day period of time while getting a DNC. It was a lot. And I remember actually saying like, wow, I haven't gone through anything like this since I am who I am now. And it was interesting because I was in the observer seat, kind of noticing. And it was almost beautiful in a way because I got to see what it was like to manage something that felt so hard with a higher perspective. And when I had the time, which I didn't until after the retreat, I created about a week of space in my schedule so I didn't have to talk to anybody. And I just laid there and I journaled. It's bringing up emotions right now, actually, uh, just to feel that baby that I lost and to release and choose what I kept. And I didn't know what that was gonna look like, and so it was a lot of just questions, like, "What do I need right now? What am I feeling? Where am I feeling that?" And there's beauty, I think, in doing this in several different ways, and so I remember sitting there and feeling it without the story, but then I realized I wasn't ready to let go of the story. So I actually just spent about an hour telling myself the saddest parts of the story and just crying and grieving this future and these plans that I had lost. And then recognizing, okay, that felt like I needed to feel that. But now it's not serving me continuing to tell myself. So, can I just focus on those emotions? So, for the next few weeks, I just came back to the emotions and I just felt them and I just gave them love and I let them release. And I still have to do that sometimes. I'm still not 1,000% over it, but I don't think we ever really get over something. I think we just become someone new through the experience. And so, uh, I found out I'm pregnant again a couple weeks ago. And so, yeah, I can feel a lot of the emotions coming up. I tend to get really nauseous during pregnancies. And then, like, the last couple days, I haven't really been nauseous and I could feel it. I'm in my head. Does this mean something's wrong? My ultrasound's not till next week. And so I'm letting myself feel that too. And just feeling the story, releasing the story, giving it love, creating a new story. And so it's just this kind of constant cycle that I build into my life.
Absolutely. Wow, so how is that congratulations, by the way. And yeah, wishing you all the best, absolutely. How is it holding hope, um, after going through something that is devastating? Understand, to go through that process and now to hold this hope, so tenderly, um, these early weeks.
It's weird, man. It's a weird process. And like I said, I've been in my head a little bit, but I recognize that regardless of what happens, it's meant for me. And some options will be harder than others. And so it's just holding an awareness, I think, that there's a bigger plan than mine. When I had my miscarriages last year, I read a book called Spirit Babies that really helped me gain a new perspective. So again, I'm aware of my inputs. I'm usually asking myself, what can help? Because this is all I can think of. How do I develop a new perspective? Who has another perspective? That could be a YouTube video. It could be a book. It could be talking to somebody whose mindset you know is in the direction you want to be. I would not ask advice from people who are not in a position that you'd want to be. But yeah, I give myself new inputs and then I allow myself that possibility. But again, like, I don't know what's going to happen. It's still early. And so, yeah, I give love to this baby. I like affirmations when I'm meditating, that I'm developing growing a healthy baby. That this one was given to me. This one wasn't planned, and the due date is my dad's birthday, actually. So it feels like it might be meant to be. But if my worst case scenario happens, I also think I've gotten to a level where I trust that there's something in that for me. And I might not understand it, but who I become through it is something that's necessary for the world.
Wow. You've been through a lot, and you seem to, you're a fighter, a warrior, someone who forges her own path. What about mentors? Besides your books and your own internal process, do you have any human living mentors who you reach out to?
I have gotten really good at creating mentors in my life. And I've done this in different ways. I consider Ram Dass and Alan Watts mentors. And what I like to do is I immerse myself in their work. And so it's one thing to just kind of dabble in it, share a quote, but I like to really get to know the teachings. And so I spent 2 years just listening to Ram Dass all the time, listened to hundreds of hours of him until I really like deeply, do you know the word grok? Deeply grokked his work. There's this book called Stranger in a Strange Land. Now that I told you the word, you're going to hear it because people use it, but it means to deeply know something to where it becomes a part of you. Well, I did that with Alan Watts as well. Paul Selig, just different people that have messages that I want to become, really. But also, I ask. I think I'm really good at asking for things where other people are nervous too. And so even when I started my podcast, I had decided I was gonna start a podcast, got an email from Pat Flynn, who was a podcast I had been listening to regularly, that he was starting his first podcasting course. So I thought this is meant to be. And there were two options, the digital version, or there was an in-person weekend that was like $3,000. Mind you, I had no money at the time. So I took out a new credit card that had exactly a $3,000 limit and put like 2,900 on it and asked if I could pay the other 100 on a card. But I did that on purpose because I knew that this was his first program and my success would be his success. He'd want a testimonial. I'd be more likely to actually be in his inner circle. So I did that investment. And when I got there, I became the star student and I decided I was going to grow my podcast faster than anyone else and keep him updated on my progress so that he would can bring me into his circle. I also just verbally said, "You're my mentor now. Just so you know, if anyone asks, you're my mentor." Because he was. I paid him to be, you know? And he ended up inviting me on his podcast to talk about my success. He invited me onto his share his keynote at Podcast Movement. And so those types of the understanding of what would be mutually beneficial, how to give back to somebody that you want to give to you, has really, really served me. And especially when you find somebody who's doing their first program or their following is still intimate, serve them first. I've even done this as I've grown my podcast where I would find specific journalists that were constantly doing podcast listicles, and I would go engage with their content for months and then ask to be featured. Didn't always work, but it did sometimes. I did the same thing with podcast apps. I even do it now. I had an interview with Dr. Jody Carrington, who came onto my podcast, and we decided to do a podcast swap. And I just loved her energy. I loved how much she's speaking in the world. And I just said, this was this year. I am just looking for more mentors in my life. I know how to develop with AI and can probably give your team some really cool strategies for reducing your workload. Do you want to do some regular calls, like maybe once every 2 months, and we just get together and share tips of what each other knows? And I can ask you about the speaking business, and because she's about 10 years ahead of me. And she said, okay. So now that's one of my mentors. I have about 4 people right now that I'm having regular calls with because I asked when a lot of people don't. So it's a little harder if the person considers themselves an influencer, but I am surprised how easy it is with some other people who are doing big things in their lives because people just want to be valued. And, if somebody came to me in that same intention, I also would probably want to give love. But again, you have to know the psychology of it. What's in it for them? And not to say that they're not selfless, but people's time is valuable. So, how are you gonna earn that?
Mhm. Mm. Well, speaking of you've had so many guests. I'm not even sure. I'm not sure how many episodes you've had, but it's multiple. Which are there any particular podcast guests that have really shifted something for you, that had changed something, the way you see something, or something internal?
Honestly, it's my goal to be changed with every conversation. I I think one thing most people are most focused on is their perspectives. Like everyone's building their own perspectives. Um, or their own they're everyone's building their own perception. But perspective is when you can actually step outside of your own perception into somebody else's. And so I'm a very, uh, I get obsessed with different topics. I just go down deep rabbit holes. Thank you, ADHD. And I love it about myself. But what I realized was a downside is I can form very strong opinions because I'm like, well, I've literally researched every in and out of this. I know what I believe about it. But I started to realize at one point that, yeah, I was feeling more intelligent but I wasn't necessarily feeling more wise because I was just so solid in what I thought I believed and there wasn't room to budge. And so because of that, I've spent a lot of time understanding what my worldview is. And ultimately, my worldview is we're living in a holographic reality and we're constantly projecting our own beliefs. And so, of course, the more solid I am in my beliefs, the stronger my opinions are. And so now I actually try to step back and, like I said, just be changed by anyone that talks to me, even if I wildly disagree with them. And maybe I don't develop their beliefs, but I develop an understanding of why theirs is the way it is. And so now to more directly answer your question, there's been a lot of guests. Almost every one of them, there's something about it. I'm pretty picky with who I bring on, and I love to use the podcast for self-service as well because I think that makes it more authentic. So when I'm going through something difficult, I'll specifically find people to almost coach me through it and just do it live on the show. And I know it's going to be relatable because I'm literally going through it. But most recently, um, Dr. Jody Carrington had an impact on me. I just loved the way she presented herself. She was fun, kind of crass, but intelligent and had a lot to share, which is why I asked her to be my mentor. There's another guest, Mark Husick. He's a hypnotist, and I met him in person, and I decided I wanted him to be my mentor. Also, big on speaking right now. And I can just call him up anytime, and he will answer the phone and have a 1 hour conversation with me, which is pretty funny. But he's a pretty intense guy. And historically, I've had on guests like James Clear of Atomic Habits, Mel Robbins. Um, yeah, many best-selling authors. Those are kind of my go-tos. I like people who have honed a topic well enough to write a whole book about it because I know it can go deep. But every one on my show has done something, and if for some reason they absolutely haven't, the episode doesn't get aired.
Right. Right. We've gone into some pretty deep discussion right as we started. And one of the things you mentioned was when you were giving advice to younger listeners on avoiding the pitfalls or dangers that one could fall into. You said don't make fear based decisions. So, how does one know the difference between a fear based response or decision and between one that's not? Because you might think you're just being brave or you're putting yourself out there, you have courage, whereas it really may be a fear based response. So, how does one know that?
There's a couple questions to discern this. I mean, even the question, is this based on love or fear? For me now, I'll feel a sort of visceral response, but sometimes it's not so easy. For example, say you are, or recently I was actually thinking about launching something specific and I could just feel a lot of resistance. And I had to sit with it a lot because I also know that when I'm on the verge of expanding my comfort zone, it feels very similar. So I have to sit with that quite a bit, ask a lot of questions, but nothing's foolproof. And so, what would you be less disappointed on yourself if you acted upon? That's another question to kind of go with. It's not 100%, but you will learn as soon as you take that action, I believe. You'll feel it. And so I was just listening to Gary Vee say something that I loved. He talked about how so many of us are so worried about making a mistake. It's like we want to be 5 for 0 with our decisions. Like, let me just overthink this enough to not make a mistake. And he said, no, I just want to see how many decisions I can make because every time you make a wrong decision, you have the opportunity to correct it to a right one. So then you're 0 for 0. And so you just keep doing that until you have more good decisions than bad. And whenever there's a bad one, you immediately know what the right one's going to be and you can correct it. And so in the beginning, don't obsess over, oh my gosh, I don't know which one this is. Allow for the experience. And I think there's still things like, for example, recently I definitely overcommitted myself for a period of months. And I've known this, focus on one thing. I read the book, The One Thing. Like I've heard this for decades in business. But I think I also had the subconscious belief that, yeah, for most people, I think my one thing is different, or I'm a manifesting generator and ADHD. I like to have my hands in a lot of things. Otherwise, I get bored. Like, I can't just do one thing, which has a lot of truth to it. But I did too much and I felt it. And I was just sitting there like, you know this already. You've heard this 1,000 times. You've tell other people this. How did you get into this situation? And I started to realize, okay, yeah, you do kind of have this belief. You can handle it though. Maybe other people can't. And I had to learn it experientially. I think that's what I've always had to do. I don't necessarily just take someone's advice and trust that there's something in that for you. If you end up in a situation that you don't want to be, you're becoming through that process. You know it in your body now. And so I don't, especially when you're young, I wouldn't worry as much about making the mistake, but just about building that muscle and having the intention. I'm going to lead with my heart over just my mind. My mind has a negativity bias. My mind is full of a lot of other people's beliefs also. Just come back to your heart and try to lead from there. And when you realize, maybe that wasn't the right decision, spend some time in stillness. What did I feel? Why do I think that went the wrong way? Was my internal dialogue at that point? Why did I end up learning this? And the more you ask these types of questions, again, the more common nature it's going to be. And the next time it'll be a little bit faster and you will build up that language with yourself.
Lovely. Let's change gears and look at the fun, adventurous side of you. You've had an interaction with Barack Obama at a party, or you were at his party. Tell us about that.
Actually, Secret Service kicked me out before Barack came into the party. However, there was a party at George Clooney's house, and usually around elections, celebrities will have these big expensive parties for campaigning. And so George Clooney was hosting one. It was $40,000 a ticket, and I decided to crash it.
Oh,
And this the way this came about, it's really funny. Recently, my husband said something about, I don't remember what we were talking about, but I was like, you got to realize the kind of person that develops some of these stories. Like, there's just something, not everyone would even get themselves into these situations. But I was at my boss's house at the time. I was one of the only like single people in the company, so we would party a lot together. It was a very toxic situation, but it was fun for a while. And he was a really wealthy guy, new money, kind of flaunting it. And he decided to buy one of these tickets. Well, one day we were up drinking and he's like, "You should come." And I was like, "You're not buying me a $40,000 ticket." And he's like, "I'll email them and see if I could just bring you." He's like sending drunk emails to Obama's team late at night. And um, long story short, we realized that wasn't going to happen. We joked about me parachuting in, but he's like, just try to come. And I was like, the only way I'm going to try to come is if you buy me a new outfit on Rodeo Drive. This is, I told you, I just ask for things. We're living in LA and it worked out. And I was a little different back then. And so he gave me his credit card. I took the limo to Rodeo Drive, bought like $5,000 worth of outfit. And I was like, this is worth it regardless. I'm going to be turned away at the door. Well, when we're in the limo, we go through like 14 checkpoints. There's one every block getting to getting to Clooney's house. And I was facing backward and he was at the back window. And so they kept just rolling down the window and seeing him and letting him through. And it's like, okay, well, we're definitely going to get turned away when we get to the door. So then we get out. I'm like telling Ed, the limo driver, don't go too far. And we're standing in this line and they look at his ID. And I'm just worried that the limo is getting too far away because it's not allowed to be in the next like mile radius. And they look at his ID and look at the list, and then they grab my ID, and I was like, okay, here's where it all ends. Somehow they never cross-reference it with the list, and they're like, just go to the golf cart. So there's a golf cart at the bottom of the very long, windy driveway. And so I go sit, and I'm waiting for Joe, my boss at the time, and there's this man sitting there waiting for it to fill up, to be taken up, and he turns around, he's like, "Hi, I'm Toby." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, Toby Maguire, I recognize you. I'm Melissa." And we go up to the top. There's another check. And I'm like, okay, this is where it happens. They look through my purse. They check my ID again. Again, never look at the list. I was meant to be in this party, I believe now, because I do not know how I kept getting through all of this. Next thing you know, I'm in George Clooney's living room looking at his family photos. There ends up being about an hour and a half cocktail hour. I got a photo with George Clooney. I took pictures with Jack Black and Selma Hayek and just talking. And it's interesting being in a situation like that. As somebody who partied in LA for like 10 years, I partied with many celebrities. There was like a 3-week period where I was with Leonardo DiCaprio like every other day. But when you're partying in those situations, you're filler. And you feel it. It's actually like when I finally stopped doing that, I felt so much better about myself because you just start to feel like nobody people and that's how they treat you. But in this situation, when they think that you are a young person who spent $40,000 for a ticket, they are interested in who you are and who your family is. So I'm just like propping up my marketing. I don't even know what I was telling these people. But then it was time for dinner and they funneled us over to he has a basketball court and it had a big like wedding tent over it. And there were only 15 tables of 10. And I was like, okay, here's where like what am I gonna do? Hide in the bathroom? By then Joe is drunk and he's just saying, she needs a table, no place setting for her. He was a French guy. And so um they looked terrified, like they had messed up and so I just kind of played it cool. They ended up saying, "Oh, we can't sit you guys together. Is that okay?" Like really terrified for their jobs, and I was like, "That's fine." And they sat me next to Barbara Streisand. So I'm eating breadsticks, talking to Barbara Streisand about men, and then I get a tap on the shoulder. They ask me a question. They go away. They come back. They tap me again, and they were finally like, "We actually need to talk to you to the side." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so they moved me to the side, and they're like, "So you don't have a ticket?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, I was like, "We paid $40,000 for 2 tickets." And I just sort of bluffed my way like, it was each ticket. And I was like, "Well, then how did I get in? Why did you even let me in just to be humiliated?" Played it off. They were very apologetic and, but they did say, "Everyone here has been vetted, and we're gonna need to escort you out." And so I walked out. I had to walk a mile in my stilettos to find Ed, but, there were all of these motorcycle cops, and I just remember they finally looked like when we got there, they were all standing at attention, and then they were all, like, scrolling on their phones, and this one guy, like, looks up at me and he goes, "Leaving so soon?" And I was just like, "I just came for the appetizers," and kept walking. Their jaws just dropped, but yeah, I it was a bold decision, but it made a great story.
That's hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. What areas of yourself are you currently working on? What are the weaknesses or the gray areas or the muscles you're trying to develop now at this point?
Mm, triggers and judgment,
Mm.
and I the way I'm working with this is through the laws of reflections. So, I believe that everything's a projection, and so this makes it a lot easier to not place my judgments on other people. It feels like it's about somebody else, but now, especially in the last couple of years, I've really developed the reflex where it's like, "Ooh," I can feel like I'm, like, internally stabbing that person. Alright, what part of me are they displaying back to me? Like, what am I seeing from myself that I'm rejecting? And so, I can do that with a lot of things. It doesn't have to be even just one person's behavior. It can be like, why am I suddenly seeing a bunch of car crashes? What in my life feels like a wreck? What in my life feels too intense? Or why am I suddenly seeing a bunch of people breaking up? Where do I, it doesn't always have to reflect right back. Like my relationship is great. So what other relationships feel like turmoil? And so I'm constantly asking myself, why is this in my view? Why is this in my universe? And then I work with it. And so I try to bring everything back to myself, and it usually gives me a clue for my next layer of work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Thank you.
beautiful. And you spoke about your marriage, and sounds like you guys have a lovely, just beautiful relationship. So I'd love to hear more about that, how you guys met. I mean, after everything you had been experiencing, how you came together, what your story was.
My relationship is one of the things I'm most proud of in my life. People that know us will be talking about relationships and then they'll be like, "Oh, but you and Shane are different." And so
Mhm.
people see it. And even funny, like random compatibility things that we've done, whether it's like horoscope compatibility. We did this Mayan couples compatibility thing for our 10-year anniversary. And every time, like, I was looking at this one app and it showed my friendship compatibility with a friend. It says, "It's chill." And then it showed with my husband and it's like glowing red, exceptional. And at this Mayan compatibility thing, the shaman was like, "Oh my gosh, we've never seen compatibility like this before." And so we have always felt like soulmates in a way. But when we met, I was going through another kind of life throwing me a curveball. I thought I was the happiest I had ever been, and then I found out in a 1-week period of time that my company with that same boss was shutting down. My landlord was selling our place, and I crashed my car. And so I at that time, I just said to myself, "Okay, way worse has happened, so I can deal with this, and I'm just gonna kinda go with the flow, and something's in this for me." But this happened in December, and I had to be out by January 1st, so I couldn't go visit my family like I normally did on Christmas since I had to pack up, and a friend invited me to a Christmas party in Big Bear, and I went very last minute, arrived on Christmas Eve at 11 p.m., and my husband happened to be there. He also wasn't supposed to go. He decided to go very last minute, and plans with his sister fell through, and we ended up I s we stayed at his house the next night because he lived right in the village of Big Bear, and he was just having people over, and we ended up just staying up all night talking, and he had a web business and I could do marketing. And at the time, I was doing a lot of online entrepreneurship and I knew the marketing side, but I tried to create the web asset and I was like teaching myself through YouTube videos and Google and all of that. And it would just take me so long. And then all of a sudden there's this guy who could whip up a logo in an hour and a website in another hour. And so I was like, oh, you can like visualize all of my mental plans. But then for his side, I was teaching him processes because he hadn't really worked in the corporate world. And I had been called the chief of efficiency. So I helped him with processes and marketing, and it just felt like we were very complementary in all the ways. We were both on the same broader spiritual paths, and we could just talk about literally everything. Even if it was something silly in the room, and I'm like, look at that thing. Does it look like, and we just like pull it apart like a Seinfeld episode. And so even to this day, like our evening routine, the kids go to bed and we come up to the office and we'll sit, have a sparkling water and just talk about things. But um, I'm really grateful when he says that he always saw his dad showing his mom love. Even to this day, his dad like calls his mom his girlfriend and they're just cute. And so I think he really saw how to treat a woman, but he also had an awareness of the things he wanted to take from his dad, but maybe the things that he wanted to be different. Like he wished he had a closer relationship with his father. So my husband's been really involved in our kids' lives. But I think we communicate really well and we both speak our needs. And we know that w- each person needs to fill themselves up in order to show up to the relationship in their wholeness. And so, for example, even when we had a newborn, I made sure he had time to go snowboarding several times a week since we live in the mountains. That's easy to do. Or I remember kind of feeling lost in that baby bubble. And when it was the age where I could pump, he was the one who told me, "Why don't you go down the mountain, find a really good yoga class? You can get a massage." And so Saturdays ended up being mom's day off, and I would go down the mountain to fill myself up and then come back and be ready to like be a mom because I had took quite a bit of time off of work. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot about us, but I think the main thing is we're both focused on the path of growth and open to learning how to show up best for one another because we are choosing for this to work and we want to be with each other forever.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. So, what has marriage taught you about yourself that maybe other relationships can't? It's a different.
Ooh, so much. I think this is the first time I've ever really learned teamwork. I mentioned I was an only child.
Mhm.
I realized not that long ago that a lot of the beliefs I thought I had were actually more of a protection mechanism. When I thought I never wanted to get married, I realized that was my armor in case I was never chosen. And um and so I've really had to learn to be a teammate. I mean, even the sports that I did cross country and yoga, things that you don't need anybody else for, really. And I chose it for that reason. I was like, well, if I'm going to develop these skills, I want to be able to do it after high school. So, like, let me do something I could do on my own. But I really have to give him credit for the patience with me. I mean, until like 2 years ago, I still had my own account and all of his were joint accounts with me. And, I think I always kind of did things to protect myself in a way, and he grew up with I mean, he's got 8 siblings, and so just a whole different situation than me, and I really had to get clear on, similar to what I said he did with his dad, what do I want to become? Like, I can keep protecting myself, but what beliefs am I reinforcing by doing so? And what's possible if I let go of some of these fears? And so I'm just challenging myself when I feel something come up, and I'm sure there's still more, but I think marriage has been the most healing experience I've ever had in my life, and for so many reasons. One, actually feeling chosen. Two, learning how to actually choose somebody else. Three, it's really easy to ignore some of your own stuff when there's not someone reflecting it back to you 24/7. I can't hide anymore. Um, and I'm so grateful for that. I don't even know how easy it would have been to fully recover from bulimia if I wasn't living with somebody. And instead, it's like accountability of somebody being there. That was one of the hardest parts about healing before is like a night alone by myself and a little bit lonely. So I think the opportunities for even greater healing are still there, just with the intention to be open and to know we've talked about like this is a soul relationship. So what did our souls come to it for? And we want to be each other's spiritual partners. And so as long as we communicate what we're seeing or what we're going through with love, we're open to bringing anything to the table and using it for our growth.
Wow. Wow. You mentioned your ADHD more than a couple of times. And I understand ADHD has hyper focus. It comes with fairly high IQ. Once you get excited about something, you like to dive into it. What are the challenges it brings?
The challenges used to be greater before I understood and chose my relationship with it. I was on a lot of Adderall for a long time, and it was really deeply tied to my eating disorder too. I think there was a lot of fears with it. Like, it just so happened that this medication not only helped me hyper focus, but it also curbed my appetite. It boosted my metabolism. And so I was deeply intertwined with this medication for a really long time. But then day we were considering moving to Croatia, and I realized how difficult it was going to be moving with that medication. And suddenly, this medication that felt like a superpower felt like an anchor. And so I decided then I wanted to change my relationship with it. And it was really hard because there is a long come off period of that. And while I was getting off of it, I felt different than I had felt in years. I felt all the feelings I didn't want to feel: hunger, a tendency to binge eat, just feeling like I wanted to lay down all day. I did not feel like myself. And so I really had to hold the vision of why I was doing it and just be okay with feeling like a mess for like 3 months. And it was probably about 6 months till I really felt like myself. But what I started to notice even after about a week is I got little parts of my personality back that I didn't even know I had lost. And then when I was able to see beyond my blindfold, I actually had to reconcile with a lot of things that I felt were stolen due to Adderall. I um I lost a lot of my joy. I wasn't as playful anymore. I had a hard time listening to people talk because I felt like they were talking too slow, so I would interrupt quite a bit or get distracted. I told myself it helped me focus, but 99% of the time, it helped me focus on the wrong thing. Like, instead of actually getting my task done, suddenly I'd be in the App Store downloading every single to-do app and or looking at YouTube videos on how to use each one, and then by the end of the day, I did nothing except for test and review every single app. Um, and so I'm actually very against Adderall. I'm sorry if anybody is on it, but in my process of removing myself from that relationship, I had to brainwash myself. And so I looked into the fact that Adderall is only one chemical compound different from meth. I looked into the changes that occur to your brain over time, what happens with dependency, what happens with long term use. And it is not good. It is not good. And I do not believe in medication for long-term use, which is also a controversial thing. And I'm sure there's cases I don't understand, so I'm not saying it with every single thing. But for me and my situation, and I think for most people's situations, you should be looking at, if you're going to take a medication, how can this be a crutch? And by crutch, just like crutches, something you use for a period of time and learn to find your own ways. And so I changed my diet completely. I learned which foods exacerbate ADHD tendencies, which foods help. It's a lot of just like whole food eating, limiting um, wheat was helpful to me, food dyes, all of the things. So it set me on a path of greater health. Um, but then creating my own sustainable structures. What does that look like for me? What if my brain feels too much of a mess? I go on a walk. Maybe I don't do the work that day. So it comes back to my own structures, the pressure that I put on myself or don't put on myself. It's actually better without the pressure. And then I have different branches I could take depending on where I'm at. So I think it's really helpful for me to plan my day the day before, but I also have like a Trello board of different things like or and my to-do list, like what's deep work, what's admin work. And so if I just am in a super ADHD mood, as I call it, I don't do my deep work tasks that day, and I'll do some of my surface level tasks, some of the back burner tasks. And so I work with myself. But for me, I would much rather be on that than a drug that we're giving a one-sided story about to profit an industry that I also have issues with.
Wow. That was beautiful. Thank you for that insight. I mean, neither of us are on any medication, but I think that was really, really beautiful. And thank you for being so honest about it. It's hugely useful.
And if people I know how that drug is. Like I said, uh I mean, it was an addiction. It's an addiction. And so I was unwilling to look at it. The amount of years my mom tried to tell me that she didn't recognize me when I was on my Adderall or when I'd just taken my Adderall. And I just would like dismiss her, would nothing to hear about it, would not hear the negative things about Adderall. So people are ready when they're ready. But I've seen a lot of people get off of it. And everybody that I know has had a similar experience as I have in just realizing that something was lost.
How long did it take to get out of your system?
Oof, I don't even know, but it took about 3 months for me to start to feel normal and about 6 months that I felt like I got my energy baseline back. And then a couple of years that I just stopped comparing myself to something that was unsustainable. And so you're taking a drug that's going to boost your energy. And if you take it for 11 years like I did, like, you're never going to get to that naturally. It's just because it's an unnatural state. And so I had a lot of inner dialogue asking myself what was more important, in the speed in which I was able to move through life or the depth in which I was able to feel it.
Wow. There's clearly a lot of depth to you. Thank you. Thank you. It's beautiful. Um, oh, any questions from you? I have one more.
Go for it.
Yeah, tell us about Jim Carrey.
Again, the way I get myself into these situations. One day I was going to a party in Malibu. A friend invited us to this party on the beach at a really beautiful home. We got there, and at the time, Malibu had very poor reception. So we realized we couldn't get a hold of anybody, and we were just waiting. But we went to a grocery store, got some bottles of Gatorade and vodka, poured it in. This was when I was still drinking, clearly, and decided to just go find the general area. Still couldn't get a hold of them, so we're like, "Well, it's a beach house. We don't know exactly which one it is, but we know the area. So what if we can get to the beach and then we just walk along till we see the party?" And so we kind of went through this fence to the private beach, sat by a volleyball court for a while, and then we're like, "Let's start walking." We're walking. We had to scale some rocks. One of our friends lost a shoe. Um, and we were going for a long time, not seeing this party. But eventually we saw a little girl, two little kids and their dad playing sand soccer. And they kicked the ball to us and we like kind of kicked it back and we ended up in this little like playful game for a second. But then they didn't want us to leave, so we just kept hanging out. And then Jim Carrey walks out, and we realize we're at Jim Carrey's house, his small family gathering. And so one of the people there owned the restaurant Little Next Door, which is pretty famous, and they're good friends. Jim Carrey had just been going through his breakup with Jenny McCarthy, so he looked a little depressed. But we ended up there from about 1 p.m. till 10 p.m., just staying at Jim Carrey's house. Uh, he brought out food for us. And while we were playing sand soccer, he ended up colliding with me and I broke my pinky toe and was like hobbling around. So we brought out ice. But it was funny because at the time, those little flip cams were like, this was back in 2009 or 10, and all the people had those little flip cams. And I just remember sitting there and he's like filming us and he goes, "This is what rich kids do on the 4th of July." And we're like, we're in Jim Carrey's home videos. And yeah, we sat and watched the fireworks with him. He brought out little American flags for us. I kept that flag for like 5 years because I didn't want to let go of it. But it was a really fun day. But weird stuff happens when you live in LA and you put yourself out there. Like there's a lot of I mean, like I said, a lot of celebrity encounters. Most of them leave you a little less than you started, but that was one that I'll always cherish.
Wow.
Well, and one more question. What's the story that you want to leave behind? What's your message?
My message changes the deeper I know myself. And right now, what feels most prominent is just helping people understand their true power of creation. Because that's what we're doing. We're always creating. And I said it earlier, but it's every thought, every belief. It's not just what you say, I'm going to do right now. It's what you're allowing yourself to think. A Course in Miracles tells people that they're too lenient with their thoughts. And so when you notice a thought that you don't want to create from, stop, sit with it. Rewrite it, challenge it. And sometimes it doesn't feel authentic to be like, "Oh, man, I looked in the mirror and I thought I was ugly, so now I'm going to say I'm pretty, I'm pretty, I'm pretty." Like, you don't feel that. But instead, I love Byron Katie's The Work. Do you really know that you're ugly? Or are you just looking, honing in on one part of your face instead of seeing the whole of who you are? Seeing yourself in motion, seeing yourself with your energy, not just this one static image. So, what do you have to do to challenge that thought to get it to just break a little bit, to just soften just a little bit? And so, it's not going to happen right away. You're not going to just rewrite a belief in a second, but you can soften its edges in one encounter. You can develop new beliefs through other questions. And so for me it's a lot of asking questions, but I want people to know that all of these things matter. All of these things are creating. And don't have fear about that. Don't be like, "Oh man, I must be really screwed up now."
Mm.
This is just the biggest opportunity that you have if you haven't done it before. And there will still be opportunities, and you don't need to do it all at once. What's most prominent right now? But if you start to approach your life that way, asking what is in this for me? Do I like this here? Do I want to become this? Do I want to be this? It'll leave room for you to see where you can create something new in that moment. And before you know it, you'll be able to look back and see how many changes have happened in the last year. When I first started doing this, I made more change in a year than I had in the previous 20. And so when you can see the effects of your own work, it becomes the best kind of addictive, the best kind of thing to hyper focus and obsess about. And then you understand that your entire life, not just your life, who you are, is a product of your own creation.
Wow. That's beautiful. Anything else from you, baby? I can just, I mean, I'm all out of questions. Her last question was what I had next. But so, is there anything you'd like to ask us?
Let's see. What is the best thing you've created in your life?
It's me or her or both of us?
Both.
Sorry?
Both of us.
Both of us. So I think that the best thing we've created is our ability to change and evolve. Uh, when we got together, we knew that we were madly in love with each other. We knew we wanted to be together. We're both strong headed, we're both fairly intelligent, and we're both, I'd say, high achievers in a sense. But we didn't know how to be together. And the how to be together part didn't just require me to change at my level and her to change at her level. It also needed us to synchronize a lot of things. So, the magic of evolving individually and evolving together and managing to create it's almost like a rowing team together. That's been our greatest creation so far. And I think we're just getting started. So, lots more to come.
I think the best part about relationships, it's you kind of wrapped it up in there, but it's not just me and you, there's also the we. There's like the trifecta, and it's a whole separate energy than just both energies combined. I think that's the best part of getting to know somebody deeply, and I'm inspired by that. Napoleon Hill's Invisible Counsel, as he called it, actually deeply changed my life because I started to realize that relationships could be so much more than most people were giving them credit for. Because he talks about how when you deeply understand somebody, you can put them on your invisible counsel. You don't need to have ever met that person. It's what inspired me to do things like immerse myself in Ram Dass's teachings. I wanted to have him on my invisible counsel so then I could step back and say, well, what would Ram Dass do? And be flooded with ideas from seemingly his mind because I understand him. But my husband is one of those people for me where he doesn't even have to be here anymore. And I say, what would he do? And I can like hear his voice. And so you can just accumulate like other people's energies through that process. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation. It's been so nice getting to know you, and I I just respect and admire your ability to open yourself up, be vulnerable, be honest, and share. It takes a lot because you know there's people listening whose lives you change by just sharing your thoughts. Thank you for that. It's been really wonderful. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.